Peterson and I'm an aeromodeller and an engineer. Join me on a fascinating journey where I show you some of the techniques used in scale aeromodelling. One of the things I really dislike with model aircraft is where the control surfaces are operated and the push rods are external to the model. I think that's awful. It's bad enough having the servos or the arm of the servos protruding through and so on ailerons and flaps. That's just about bearable, but I don't like it, but for convenience it's easier. But on this model, the rudder is operated through a push rod that comes up outside the fuselage and along the top to the rudder. Now that I simply cannot stand. So I'm going to take a knife to the model and hack open some access. I'm cutting at an angle so that I'm creating a chamfer. And the idea is that when I put it all back together again, that chamfer will make the seam a lot harder to see. So it's all very well doing left-handed, but it's not very easy. And that's gone further than I wanted, but never mind. So if we lift that up, we should see a push rod cable. There we have it, a snake. So what I want that snake to do is to come away from there, which it should do fairly easily. We'll just push it, so it has a slight bow in it, and then push it downwards. Let's get something to prod it with. There. Now it's much further down. Okay. Hopefully, no damage in there. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of the push rod coming out here and going across the top, I'm going to take that push rod and that Bowden sleeve through this section here and out here, which I hope you can see. And then for the rudder operation, I'm going to silver solder an arm onto this post here, an arm, a brass arm with a hole in it, and then that rod is going to come out through a hole here onto a Z bend, which will go down through that arm and lock it, and then the push rod will operate the rudder at the top and the tail wheel underneath through an arm that's totally hidden. And because it's a Z bend, it shouldn't really require any maintenance whatsoever, as long as that solder joint is good and solid. So I shall silver solder it just to make sure. I know I've shown this process several times before, but it never hurts to repeat it, show it again. So I've got a brass collet and a piece of brass as a control arm, and I'm going to solder one to the other using silver soldering techniques. So I've got some Mick Reeves stainless steel flux, mixed a little bit of powder in the lid with a drop of water, and I've also got some fire bricks to control the heat, and then a 2175 butane propane mix gas. So it's more than just a blow lamp, it's a bit hotter than that. So what I'm going to do first is paint a little bit of the flux on the two parts that I need to join. Now you'll notice that the collet, the hole has been elongated on one side and also elongated on the other side, but the other side. So you end up with a diagonal line between the two. And what this allows, it allows you to slide the collet past a 90-degree bend, such as that. You'll see this collet will slide around that. Anyway, let's put a bit more flux on just to make sure we're going to get a good seal. Sorry about the noise. took quite a while to heat the collet compared to the arm of the arm of brass, but it did eventually all flow nicely, and as you can see, that's a good solid joint. Now we'll let that cool down, and then we'll just see if we can get it past that 90-degree bend. Well, as it happens, I had to open out the sort of elongations very slightly. But there you can see it now goes past that bend, and we can get it down to where we need it, which is on that black line, like so. I took the collet out before I applied any heat, just to make sure. And then when you tighten it up, it should stay nice and straight, which it does, because what you've done is elongated on these angles, but where the screw goes is across the side, and that width is the same. So now you have, control horn for controlling the rudder. It also controls the tail wheel. Just going to apply a bit of buffing to it with a wire wheel. Just gets all those nasty oxidants off that could corrode the fitting. A little bit more on the bottom, I think, but you can see that's the braze has got right the way into everything, so it's a good joint. I had considered trying to find another way of making something less unsightly than this tail wheel, but to be honest, the yellow one, it wasn't really that conspicuous in flight, and on the ground it's under the tailplane, so you can't really see what's going on. It would be nice, but I couldn't think of a quick way, and this is all about a quick way to solve this, and this was lower on the priority scale than, say, hiding the rudder pushrod. Now when I do this up for the last time, I'll actually put some thread lock on there, just to be doubly sure. Now it's a bit wobbly and loose at the moment because the only bearing is the plastic of the tail wheel, but it will have the rudder attached here, and then the bearings of the rudder hinges will hold it still. So now we need to do is put a kink in this. So if you've not seen these before, these are Z-bend pliers. And they put a lovely neat Z-bend. Well, because the slop was so great in that horn, because I was going to use thicker piano wire and decided to use thinner stuff because it moved more freely through the tube, I've gone back to the thicker piano wire, so I've bent up a new piece. Right, so as this is possibly the last time this will be assembled, just going to use a drop of the blue thread lock, Loctite. This doesn't set solid, but it sets very nearly solid, so it's ideal for what we want. So try and get this height exactly right. Been a bit foolish really, and I ended up with the grub screw right where I don't want it. Could have faced any direction except where it is. And there we are, nice and tight. And that's really stiff. So that's not good. Not good at all. And I think the stiffness is coming from this plywood here. So this is much too low, I think. So if we bring it up so it's a more natural height for the piano wire, see how it behaves then. So what I may have to do is pack out the area under here slightly. Much better. Put a plastic sleeve on there. What I'm going to do is just put some little packing piece of balsa in there, but actually it needs to be half as thick as that. Like that. So first of all, what you do, if you want to glue to a plastic tube, the easiest way is to actually wrap a plastic tube tightly in masking tape. The masking tape will glue much better than the plastic tube. Then we slide the tube along here. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the tube to the balsa first. Might be easier, might not be. But why is it these tubes, these capillary tubes, always block just as you're about to glue? Oh, it's well and truly blocked. God's sake. Oh, it's got a hard bit right in the middle of the tube. I only fitted this tube yesterday, so that's another one almost gone. Don't know about you, but I get through hundreds of these little bloody capillary tubes, and they're not that cheap. Let's give it a quick get it to go off a little bit quicker. It's a big lump, I'm afraid. I didn't mean to put that much on. And we slide it along, and you can see it's just the right thickness to do what we want. I'm going to set that to the midpoint. It's going to be about there. And there we have it. It's just a little bit more support to stop the flexing, because it's only supported there, and to there is quite a long way, so it's got a little bit of support in the middle. Hold that steady where it should be. Lots of nice travel, and it's fairly free. Not as free as I'd like it, but it's a much thicker piano wire than I was originally going to use. Of course, when we come to put the tailplane and the fin and rudder on, this may not all work, but there you go. Probably okay to close up the hole I made at the side of the fuselage now. First of all, let's get a new capillary tube. I believe it only lasted a day. That's the shortest ever. You do it, usually lasts me several days. Right, so a new tube. Here is the missing piece. Hopefully, because I cut everything at a bit of a chamfer, should all go back fairly neatly. Here you can see the method behind my madness. The fin goes on here, like that. And normally the exit point for the pushrod is through a hole on this side that you probably can't see. And then it goes to a horn on the rudder. In this instance, you can see we've gone underneath the rudder. And we'll go into, I haven't checked where the hole is on that. And you can see the idea anyway, except it's still not quite right. So if we put that on there like that, you'll see that now when the tailplane goes on underneath, and what we have to do is we have to make a clearance hole for the pushrod, a small clearance hole for the pushrod on the leading edge of here. So there is a slot in the tailplane. Just remove the film. So the tailplane drops over just like that, but it'll need a little notch cutting just there. To do the notch, I'm just going to use a file that fits over that, like that. So you see we've gone through the bulkhead underneath the fin, and there you can see is the exit point where the pushrod came out. So you had an unsightly pushrod and control horn over the top of everything. This way It's all hidden. You need to use enough epoxy that you get a good joint and everything touches where it should touch. But you've got to remember, epoxy is heavy. You really don't want to use more than you have to. What you can't see is the laser level lines that are being projected onto the model. I've used the wing tube as the reference to get the wings level. And then I've altered the laser level to get the tail plane level. I'm quite happy with that. It's pretty close. Just hope that Seagull haven't put the wing tube in level. I thought I'd show you this bit because it's a way I do it. Just see what you think. So what I've done is I've pushed the fibre hinges into the tail plane as to the halfway point. Then I've pushed a pin through, going through the trailing edge, not through the upper surface, because you don't really want to mark it, do you? So through there, through the hinge, right through to the other side, but not quite through to the other side. And that stops the hinges going in any further. So then when you come to put the elevator on, all of this jiggling will not, in theory, push the hinges in to the tail plane. That's the theory anyway. And I tend to find if you go backwards or forwards with the elevator, it'll sort of a fore and aft motion. That's what I'm trying to say. They will eventually go in. Now, when you've got them on like that, before you go any further, make sure you move them to full deflection, because you want there to be a little bit of a gap in the hinges, and you may need the hinges or the elevator to move away from the tailplane. You don't want a tight fit necessarily. You want it as tight as possible, but it mustn't restrict it. So that's all the up I'll need on this plane. So that's fine. Then, I don't know how many of you are going to complain and say, oh no, that's not enough, that's not good enough. All I do is thin CA into the hinge. And I give it a good soaking. Okay. And I find that that'll soak into the wood on both sides. And I've never had one fail yet. There's always a first, obviously. May as well show you how I hinge, as unhinged as I am. There's lots of ways you can do this. You can get special tools for it. I have these eyeballs I use. My Mark 1 eyeballs. They work for me. If this model were IC, then I probably would use the full hinge, just because the model's subject to more vibration. these bits of fuel tubing just stop these clevises splaying apart. However, if you're getting the sort of load that's going to splay them apart, it's probably going to rip the neoprene, the silicon, or then rip the silicon. Anyway, well, to all intents and purposes, that's the airframe built. If I put a battery pack in it now and sellotape the canopy on top, I could go and fly it. Okay, all the radio gear's in, everything's set up, motors in, etc. Now, to say this was straightforward would not be true, because the first one I did, the Canadian DHC1 Chipmunk from Seagull, was 2 or 3 years ago, and it was they'd only just come out, and it went together much better than this one. This one had lots of parts that just didn't fit or were really soft. Some of the screws were so soft they were like cheese, and the threads stripped. The blind nuts that go in the engine bulkhead area, they were so soft, and the threads were wrong, badly cut. So I had to replace all of those in the end. They've also changed the methodology and the process. And because I haven't got the instructions from the old one, I can't really tell you how they've changed, but I didn't have any problems with the first one. The instructions were very clear in the way I went. This one, I was struggling. For example, the spinner backplate should sit 145 millimeters away from the bulkhead. And the adjuster that comes with it is, I think I showed you it in a previous part of the video, that adjuster won't let you take the motor any further away than 140 millimeters, so it's 5 millimeters short. Now, I never had any of these issues before. I've got around it by actually mounting the motor at 140, not 145 as suggested, and the cowl fits fine. If I'd actually extended it to 145, it might not have done. So just to whiz through some of the things you're going to have to look at if you put one of these Seagull Chipmunks together. At the back, where the elevator push rods come out, and there's 2 elevator push rods, one for either elevator, each side, where they come out of the side of the fuselage, the Bowden snake did not exit the fuselage in the right place, and I had to cut open a bit of the slot to try and find it and to free it up. The problem was it made the elevators really stiff, and there's no way they would centre. And for an airplane like this, you need the elevators to go back to the same point every time, whether you've deflected up and then gone to the middle, deflected down and gone back to the middle. You need it to centre because it's quite a precise airplane to fly, and you don't really want it wandering around. So that took a little bit of faffing about. The flap hinges are another thing. When I did the Canadian one, I got little sleeves of rubber to go over the flap hinges to make them secure. With this kit, they give you some small short sections of silicon tubing, and I split 3 pieces before I actually got one even close to going over the hinge. There's no way it was going to work. And in the end, what I found was little tiny short sections of this specific size silicon tube slid over the hinges and has secured them. The spinner that they provide is not really relevant to me because I have a friend that has 3D printed a spinner for this, but the plastic nose cone for the spinner that comes from Seagull is too pointy, so it's not the right shape, but that's not really too big a problem. The problem is that the plastic front part won't interlock to the rear part, to the back plate. It's useless, so that's gone straight in the bin. I couldn't make it fit. The thickness of the edge of the spinner cone won't sit in the slot that's machined into the back plate. There's lots of flaws in the canopy, lots of I don't know what you'd call them. They're just the canopy's not very clear. It's got lots of marks in the plastic. I've talked about the motor mount not being able to adjust it far enough to suit the instructions. Also, this canopy section, the whole section, is really stiff to push down onto the model. I've eased both ends, sanded both ends to give it a little bit more play, a little bit more leeway, but it's still really stiff. We'll have to see if that's going to be an issue. Now, normally I don't use the screws, so these will get covered up. These holes will get covered up. I use two magnets, neodymium, I can never say that, strong magnets, one at the front, one at the rear, to hold this onto the airframe. And for the yellow one, it had never been an issue. But with this one, I don't think I'm going to need even magnets. It's so stiff, but it does mean it's going to be difficult to get off, to get out the batteries and what have you. So we'll have to see how that works out. So there we go, that's the airframe more or less done now. So what I'm going to do now is spray it silver. So I'll do a short video on covering that. And then we should be good to go. I contacted, now I usually cut my own decals, but the price of these decals and what have you is so cheap from a company called Pyramid Models, and they're in the UK. And I think that little lot cost me a tenner. So it's all the roundels and all the thin flashes for the back. I'll do my own lettering for the sides. So it just wasn't worth me cutting them and getting the vinyl in, to be honest, the red, white and blue vinyl to make them. It just wasn't worth it. So so there we go. So that's probably all we're going to show you this time. And with a bit of luck, next video, you'll see it silver.